Welcome to the session, students. In the last few sessions, we have discussed about matrices. Now, in this session, we will discuss the practical utility or practical applications of the matrices. So, in this direction, Leontief was the first person who developed a model by using the concept of matrices. So, Wesley Leontief used matrices to model economic system, and this model referred to as input-output model. In fact, the Leontief model divides the economies into various sectors, and each sector produces goods and services not only for itself but also for others. And what is the assumption of this model? The assumption of this model is what? All the sectors are completely interdependent with each other. There is no sector which runs independently. And the second condition is what? The input must always equals to output. So, Professor Wesley Leontief, a Nobel laureate, actually he was awarded the Nobel Prize for his excellent contribution in the field of economics. So, Professor Wesley Leontief, a Nobel laureate, deals with this particular situation or particular question: what level of output each of an industries in an economy produce in order that it will just be sufficient to satisfy the total demand for that particular product. What level of output must be produced by the various industries running so that the required demand must be satisfied. This is the basic idea or basic objective of the Leontief input-output model. And this input-output model can be classified in two categories, one closed and two is open. There is a very little difference between these two models. The Leontief input-output model is said to be closed if all consumptions are within the industries and there is no external demand. Means whatever the industries are producing, the total output must be consumed by industries themselves. There is no requirement for the external demand. Such a model is called as closed model. And naturally, if industries are producing any commodity or services, they are being completely consumed within the industries, they are of no worth. So, the closed model is not very much practical in nature. Model 2 says, in addition to internal consumption, there is an outside demand by the consumers. Means the commodities and the services produced by the various industries, they must be consumed within the industries as well as for the customers outside the industries. They may be individual customers, they may be the government sectors, they may be the private sectors, means people like us, right? So, we will discuss the open model first. Actually, if you understand the concept of open model, you can very easily understand the concept of closed model also, because the calculations involved in the open model are at higher end rather than the calculations involved in the closed model. So, before proceeding the basic idea of the model, actually here in this table, what I did, I have considered the simplest case in the sense so that you all may be easily able to understand the concept of the model, because at least two industries we need. If you understand the concept of this model for two industries, the same idea can be extended to any number of industries. Clear? So, let us consider an economy consisting of two industries shown below. Look at this table very carefully. This table is divided into various rows and columns, or you can call it as in the form of a matrix, right? So, the output and input is being referred by the columns and the output is being referred by the rows. Means the rows simply represents the output and the columns simply represents the input of the industries. So here we have taken two industries, in fact, steel and automobile. What Leontief actually said, if steel and automobile, they are the two industries, then none of these two can run independently. Neither steel industry can run independently, nor automobile industry can run independently. Both of these two will have an exchange of goods and commodities within them. This is the meaning of or the basic idea of the Leontief input-output model. So, steel industry and automobile industries, we have taken two industries. So, the table shows what the production or the output of steel industry is X1 and the output of the automobile industry is X2, right. We have taken two industries and X1 and X2 simply represents the output of steel industry as well as automobile industries. Clear? So, naturally, if X1 is the total output of the steel industry and this steel industry out of the total output X1, X11 unit is demanded for the steel industry itself, right. X12 unit is demanded by the automobile industry and D1 is what? D1 is the final demand, means the commodity produced by the industry which is given for the people outside the industry. They may be anything else. Similarly, X2 is the total output of automobile industry and out of the total output X2, X21 is demanded at steel and X22 is demanded at automobile itself and D2 is considered as the final demand. Clear? Here this L1 and L2 are considered as input of the steel industry as well as automobile industries. In input you can take the raw material, labor work, etc. Right. So, what does it mean actually? X1 is being divided in three parts. The first thing is what? The total output is X1. See, total output. This is X1. This X1 can be divided in two parts, in fact. One, internal demand plus external demand, right. Internal demand means what? Internal demand is also known as in some books transitional, right. So, internal demand is the demand which is being consumed within the industry is called as internal consumption or internal demand and external demand which is for the outside the industry. Similarly, we can write the equation for X2. So, X2 can also written as internal demand plus external demand, right. Clear? So, the demand total output of X, total output of the steel X1 can be divided in two parts, this and this. So, what does it mean? Internal demand means the demand which is being consumed within the industries and external demand simply refers which is going out of the industries. Clear? So, what we can write it, X1 can be written as, so write it here, X1 is the sum of what? This X11 plus X12 plus D1. Clear? Likewise, this X2 can be written as X21 plus X22 plus D2. Look at very carefully. Clear? The total output of the steel industry is divided in two parts, internal plus external. Internal, which is being consumed within the industry, and external, which is going outside the industry, right. So, X1 can be written as this is the internal demand and this is the external. Likewise, for X2, this is the internal demand and this is the external demand. Clear? Now, what we will do, these are the two equations which represents the total output of the steel industry as well as automobile industry, and we can divide these two total output in two parts. We get these two equations, right. But these equations are not more than sufficient. They simply represents the flow of input and output. What Leontief actually did here, see, Leontief transformed these flow of input and output into quantitative terms, because if you want to transform any data into mathematical form, you must have its quantitative representation. Without quantitative representation, it is of no use in mathematics. So, x1 and x2 are what? Now, see how these x11, x12, x21 and x22 behave. See, x1 is the total output of steel industry. What does it mean? It means to produce x1 unit of steel, x11 unit of steel itself required. Naturally, because if we are running, if anybody is running a steel firm, he also need steel for maintaining his office. So, steel is still required for the steel. So, to produce x1 unit of steel, x11 unit of steel is required. And to produce x1 unit of steel, x21 unit of automobile is required. Clear? Are you getting this point? To produce x1 unit of steel, x11 unit of steel itself is required, and to produce x1 unit of steel, x21 units of automobile is required. Likewise, come to second row, x2. x2 is what? x2 is simply the output of automobile industry, right. So, what this table actually shows, to produce x2 units of automobile, x12 unit of steel is required, and to produce x2 unit of automobile, x22 units of automobile is also required. Clear? Are you getting the interpretation of this table? See what we did, the row and column. Row represents the output and column represents the input. Now, x11, x12, x21, x22, we generally write them as xij in terms of matrices. Xij means if I is 1, j is 1, we will get x11. If I is 1, j is 2, we will get x12. If I is 2, j is 1, we will get x21. And if I is 2, j is 2, we will get x22. Right. So, in general, x11, x12, x21, x22 can be represented as xij. Write this. Xij means it's a general notation of a matrix. Xij simply denotes the output of ith industry used as an input of jth industry. What does it mean? X12 shows what? X12 will simply denote the output of the first industry used as input of the second industry. X22 will represent what? It simply represents the output of industry 2, the output of industry 2 used as an input of industry 2 itself. And how much steel is required to produce steel itself, how much steel is required to produce automobile itself, how much automobile is required to produce automobile itself, and how much automobile is required to produce itself. There are four options, right? So we have explained all the four options as X11, X12, X21 and X22. Clear? So Xij, this is a very important term. You should keep in mind Xij simply refers the output of the ith industry used as an input of jth industry as explained here. Hope you understand this concept, right? Now look at these two equations. These two equations are very important actually. Say, to produce X1 unit of steel, we need X11 unit of steel and X21 unit of automobile. Now look at here. Now we will transform. So X11, X12, X21, X22 in this table. These quantities simply represents the flow of input and output. Now we will transform the flow of input and output in terms of quantities. Then we will get the model in complete sense, right? See, what is this? Look at here. We know to produce, see, X11 units of steel requires to produce X1 unit of steel, right? Clear? So, how much amount of steel is needed to produce 1 unit of steel? Clear? So, to produce 1 unit of steel, the amount needed is given as X11 divided by X1. Clear? Are you getting this operation? This operation is very important. See, X11 unit of steel is required to produce X1 unit of steel. Then how much units of steel will require to produce 1 unit of steel? That is calculated by dividing X11 by X1 itself, right? So if we are dividing X11 by X1 itself, so this, if you are dividing any number by any other number, you will get a new number. Say the division of these two numbers is giving you A11. Clear? Now we will use A11 is what? A11 is the output of 1 unit which can be achieved by consuming the input of first industry. So A11 means we generally use this formula here. See, like Xij, the formula to calculate these coefficients Aij, this is equals to Xij divided by Xj. Clear? So this formula works on the same principle. Aij is what? See, Aij, this represents the amount of input from industry I required to produce 1 unit of output of industry J. Clear? So Aij simply refers the amount of input from industry I required to produce 1 unit of output of industry J. Now we can use this formula to transform the flow of input and output into mathematical or quantitative terms, because Aij represents the production of one unit, means how much units of the input of a commodity is required to produce one unit of output is being represented by Aij. Clear? So Aij is this. Now use this formula for all these four terms x11, x12, x21 and x22. Say I is 1, j is 1, we will get A11. This is equals to x11 divided by x1. Now the same thing. Clear? A12 is equals to x12 divided by x2. Third is A21 is equals to x21 divided by x1. And finally A22 is equals to x22 divided by x2, right? Clear? And how this formula works, I have explained here. Let me explain once. See, x11 unit is required to produce x1 unit of steel, means x11 unit is required to produce x1 unit of steel. So how much unit of steel will required to produce one unit of steel, that is being represented by Aij or A11. Clear? So use this formula of Aij is equals to Xij divided by Xj to convert these flow of input and output into quantitative values. Then we will get the Leontief matrix equation from these two equations, right? So what is now A11 simply? A11 is what? A11 will represent the input from industry 1 required to produce one unit of output of industry 1. Clear? A11. Similarly, A12 is what? A12 is the amount of input from industry I, means 1. Amount of input from industry 1 required to produce one unit of output of industry 2. Similarly, A21 is what? A21 simply represents the amount of input from industry 2 required to produce one unit of output of industry 1. And finally, A22 represents the amount of input required from industry 2 to produce one unit of output of industry 2 itself. Means how much automobile itself is required to produce one unit of automobile. Means what does it mean? A11 simply represents how much quantity of steel itself is required to produce one unit of steel. Likewise, A22 represents how much quantity of automobile as an input is required to produce one unit of automobiles. So Aij simply refers the representation of what? One unit of output. So A11, A12, A21, A22 can be calculated by using these four formulas, right? See here, as I have calculated all these things. A11 is equals to x11 divided by x1. It is what? Steel input required for the steel output itself. A12 is what? X12 divided by X2, steel input required for the automobile as an output. A21, X22 divided by X1, automobile input required for steel as an output. And A22 is equals to X22 divided by X2, automobile input for automobile output itself. Clear? So by using this conversion formula, now we will transform these two equations to the Leontief equations. See what we will do here. We know x1 is equals to x11 and x12. See, what is the value of x11 from here? X11 from here can be written as, see, x11 is equals to a11 into x1 from this formula. See. And what is the value of x12? x12, see from here, x12 is equals to, from this formula, see, a12 into x2, right? Now, what about this x21? x21, this is equals to, x21 is written as a21 into x1, and finally the fourth term is what? x22. This is equals to a22 into x2, right? So we can determine the values of x11 means this, x12 means this, x21 means this, x22 means this by using this formula, and we will replace these values of x11 by this value, x12 by this value, x21 by this value, and x22 by this value. Substitute these values in these two equations, we will get the required equation of Leontief input-output model, which I will show you in the next slide. So before going to the next slide, try to understand the concept, how does it work, right? What we did here, we have these two equations. Let us take once again, we have these two equations because the output of the steel we have divided in two parts, internal and external. Internal means within the industries, that is x11 plus x12 plus D1 is the outside demand. Similarly, x2 is equals to x21 plus x22 internal demand plus D2 as external demand. Clear? Now, after using this conversion formula in terms of 1 unit of output, how much units of input of a particular commodity from a particular industry is required. It is being represented by Aij. Clear? So, Aij simply represents the amount of input from industry I required to produce 1 unit of output of industry J. Clear? So, using the formula of Aij is equals to Xij divided by Xj, what we will do? We will calculate the values of X11 means this, X12, X21 and X22. Now, substitute the value of X11, this value, and the value of X12 is this value in equation number 1. And the value of x2 is this, and the value of x22 is this in equation number 2. We will get two new equations which are shown on the next slide. So look at here, let x1 and x2 be the total output of the industries, steel and automobiles respectively, right? This we have already taken. So what was our equation? x1 was equals to x11 plus x12 plus d1. This was our equation. Now see how from this equation we can get this equation. What is the value of x11? By using the formula Aij is equals to Xij divided by Xj. So find out the value of x11. A11 is equals to x11 divided by x1. So from here, what is the value of x11? X11 is equals to A11 and x1. Clear? This is the value of x11. Now find out the value of x12 similarly. Say A12 by this formula is equals to x12 divided by x2, right? So the value of x12 is equals to A12 into x2. Clear? Now substitute the values of x11 and x12 in this equation and see what happens. We will get x1 is equals to, x1 is what? x1 is now a11 x1 plus x12 is what? a12 x2 plus d1. Clear? Now look at this equation and equation number 1, both are same. x1 is equals to a11 x1 plus a12 x2 plus d1. Clear? So this is equation 1. Similarly, our second equation was what? x2 is equals to, it was a21 x1 plus a22 x2 plus d2. So by using the same formula, this, find out the value of a21. What is the value of a21? Say a21 is equals to x21 divided by x1. So from here, x21 is a21 into x1. Now the value of x21 is this. What is left? a22. So a22 is equals to x22 divided by x2. So what is the value of x22? x22 is what? x2 is a21 x1, a22 x2. What is the value of x22? Right? So put the value of x22 is equals to a22 into x2. Right? So put the value of x2. What is this equation? x2 was, x2, the equation 1 is obtained. x2 is what was the value of the equation 2? x2 was x21 plus x22, right? x21 plus x22 plus d2, right? Now value of x21 is what? The value of x21 is, x2 is equals to a21 and x1 plus x22 is a22 of x2 plus d2. This is equation number 2. x2 is a21 of x1 plus a22 of x2 and d2, right? So this is how we obtain these two equations, and these two equations are considered as the Leontief matrix equations, right? So up to here, how we can transform a model or a word problem into the mathematical equation. This is the contribution of the Leontief, who first transform a word problem or any economic situation into the mathematical equations, right? Now, after having these equations, now we have nothing to do. What is left? We have discussed a number of methods to find out these solutions. Here this Aij xj means a11 x1 if we take I is 1, j 1, a12 x2 if we take I is 1, j is 2. So Aij xj is the number of units produced by industry I and consumed by industry J, right? So see, we have to find out, actually these two equations are our main objective, and these two equations are known as Leontief matrix equations. Anyway, by any means, we have to find out the solution of these two equations. Now look at these two equations carefully. We have a number of ways to find out the solution of these two equations. We have already discussed two methods to find out the solution of a system of linear equations, right? This is a system of linear equations in two variables x1 and x2, right? So we are free to use either the Cramer's rule we can use to find out the values of x1 and x2, or we can also use the method of matrix inversion to find out the solution of these two system of linear equations. Now see how we can transform these two system of linear equations to a matrix equation, that is Ax is equals to b. This we have already studied. See, the right hand side of this we take it as x1 and x2, right? And what is D? D is taken as the final demand. What is left? A. A is the matrix of the coefficients of the variables x1 and x2. So, what is A? A is A11, A12, A21 and A22. This is A, this is X, this is D. Now, see what is this? The equation is x1 is equals to x1 is equals to A11 x1 plus A12 x2 plus D1, and x2 is equals to A21 x1 plus A22 x2 plus D2. Now, the left hand side, see what happens. This can be written as x1 and x2, right? This is equals to, this is within the industry, right? So, A is what? A is taken as A11, A12, A21, A22, and then x1, x2 is also there, and this is plus our demand D1 and D2. So, these two equations can be written in the form of the matrix equation. A is this, X is this, and D is this. Now, how we can write this? See, the left hand side can be written as Cx, x1, x2, x. This is equals to, if we multiply these two matrices, we will get the product, that is Ax, and this is D, right? So, the equation is what we obtain this equation as the matrix equation, and this is called as the Leontief matrix equation. What we can do further? We can transform Ax from right to left. So, this can be written as x minus Ax, this is equals to D. Now, this can be written as, take x common, I minus A of x is equals to D. Clear? So, this is our main matrix equation, and we call this equation as the Leontief matrix equation, and the matrix A itself here, it is known as the Leontief matrix. It is also known as technology matrix. It is also known as consumption matrix. So, in different books, you will have the different name for the matrix A. Clear? So, our equation is what? I minus A of x is equals to D. So, what is this? I minus A. I is an identity matrix. If you take the difference of I minus A, you will get a matrix. So, I minus A is a matrix, A into x. If you take I minus A as A dash, so A dash of x is equals to D. You know, this system of equation you can solve by using either the Cramer's rule or by matrix inversion method. So, this is our equation, right? Now, the above equation is called Leontief equation, and which can be solved by either using the Cramer's rule or by matrix inversion method, right? So, student, I have taken the simplest example of two industries, because at least two industries are required to understand this Leontief input-output model. And if you understand the concept of the two industries, you can very easily extend the same idea up to any number of industries. So, finally, our objective is what? Our objective is to obtain this Leontief equation, and this is the Leontief equation, and naturally solution of this equation means find out the value of x, and you know Ax is equals to D has a unique solution A inverse of D if determinant of A is not equals to 0. This is the concept of matrix inversion method. So, students, hope you understand the concept of Leontief input output model, and you will be able to understand this concept. Now try to extend, I will advise you, try to extend the same idea for three different industries, and then try to obtain this equation I minus A of x is equals to D. So thank you very much. I should stop it here, and we will discuss some numerical questions in the next session. Thank you.